It's not a comfortable subject. It's not something people want to spend time thinking about. If you're a circumcised man, it's definitely not something you want to think about. And if you've done this to someone else, if you're a mother or a father who's done this to their child, it's probably not something you want to think about.
Did you know about circumcision when you were a child?
No, I did not know about it because the family was Jewish, and all the relatives and extended family and so forth were Jewish. And as far as I knew, that's what was the way a penis should look, the way a penis did look, and that was no question about it. And I didn't even know at that time that there had been any alteration of my penis.
I cannot recall when I first became aware that I had been circumcised. It's something that is so embedded in my being that it can't even register when I became conscious of it. No, I don't recall when.
Because I have such a big family and people are always getting married and having children, there's always been circumcisions throughout my whole life that I've attended. So as far back as I can remember is the first time it entered my consciousness.
Well, as a child born to Jewish parents, I was aware of circumcision because the word bris was often used, and I remember asking, I can't remember if it was my mother or my brother, what this bris business was all about, and you know, they sort of explained that something was taken off my genitals, and but I didn't, and it was supposedly healthier. It was supposedly healthier to have this done, but that was about it, and I really didn't understand too much what was involved.
So I remember saying, parroting that line, it's cleaner, healthier, and for the first time sort of heard myself saying it and saw the reaction on their faces, and they practically left me out of the pub. And that was when I sort of thought, yeah, I guess that does sound pretty crazy. Why do we do this? How did I end up thinking that? Should I continue to think that? And that was sort of the impetus for my looking into it.
Because I was in the company of those who were circumcised, and there was no question about that's what a Jew does or has done to him. There was not any thought about it.
Then when I was 16, I did some research. What is circumcision? What is the foreskin? And I'm like, so that's what a penis naturally looks like. That's what's supposed to be there. That makes sense. And the idea of removing it did not make sense.
So every time I had a new cousin that was born, my family would go and attend the bris ceremony. All the men would go on one side of the room, and the women would go on the other side of the room. The mother would bring the child, hand it off to usually the grandfather, who would be holding the child while the mohel is circumcising them. And it sort of happens during the morning prayer session. You pray a little bit, there's a little break, and then you do the circumcision, finish the prayers, and then you eat bagels and things like that afterwards to celebrate.
I should mention I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and when I was 13 years old, my family moved to Israel to seek better religious education for myself and my siblings. I have 5 siblings. So we moved to Israel, and I was living there, and when I was 17 years old, I was given a very unusual honor of being the sandek at a cousin's bris. Now, the sandek is the person who holds the baby at the bris, and this is, it's considered a huge honor. It's usually reserved for elders, very important members of the family, but this was a small family affair, and I was given this honor of holding my cousin for his brit milah, for his circumcision. I had never been in this kind of proximity to a bris before. You always go to, growing up Orthodox, you're always going to brises. But what tends to happen is there's a kind of human ring that forms around the proceedings, where people are sort of, hunched up and kind of looking at what's going on, and it's kind of almost impenetrable if you're of a certain size. So children tend not to really get to the front, so you never really see the actual thing. Of course, you hear the babies crying, but that's pretty much the extent of it. So here I am, I'm 17 years old, and I'm in, not just proximity, I'm holding the baby, and the mohel makes the blessing, and he cuts my cousin's penis, and my cousin's screaming, and he then puts his mouth on the wound on the freshly cut penis and sucks, and he comes back up, and there's a little bit of blood on his beard, and I was shocked out of all kinds of, I was shocked out of my sort of ignorance of this issue, basically.
My name is Miriam Pollack, and I'm a Jewish woman, and Judaism has always been a very central part of who I am. It has defined and inspired my understanding of compassion and justice, and what our task in this world is, and that is to be co-creators with God and to repair this world. I've always taken that very seriously. So when my 2 baby boys were born, I never questioned circumcision, because I love this tradition and I love the values that I have absorbed from it. And for many years after that, I could not even articulate the trauma that I felt as a mother, having witnessed this rite on my babies. I didn't know how to even formulate the questions, because they were in total contradiction with everything that I believed and trusted.
Those were the 2 worst days of my life. And I felt so tormented as a human being that I had witnessed this, that there were other people I loved in that room, and yet it was unspoken. There was no one venting or nobody speaking up for that child. And I knew I could never witness that again. And what I usually tell Jewish mothers is that there are many moms who tell me that if they have one nightmare or regret, it's that they allowed their son to be circumcised.
The mother so often leaves the decision up to the man, up to the father to make, when what the baby is expecting is that the mother will be its protector. Because babies always expect that the one in whose body I grew is my defender. And then women turn the decision over to the man, saying, well, it's really his because he has a penis. What?
Men det at skære i et barn uden grund, det sætter altså et aftryk, som munder ud i spørgsmålet, hvorfor gjorde I det, mor?
So I regret my choice of circumcising. The regret is deeper and more difficult and more painful to overcome than anything else I've ever really done in my life. And I really believe it comes from not protecting my son. I allowed him to be cut. I made a choice that can't be corrected or changed. He was born perfect and beautiful, and I cut the most sensitive part of his body.
When my son was born in 1983, and we were at a Harvard hospital, and a physician came into the room and asked, have you decided whether to have your son circumcised yet or not? And this was a very odd question because my wife and I had never even considered it. And then my wife's a physician, so I looked to her to give some input, but she'd given birth the day before on medications and was tired and nursing. And in retrospect, she was, in my opinion, legally incapacitated. So then the doctor launched into what Bob Van Houw calls the talk, where the doctor said at the time, based on the AAP's position, then in effect that circumcision reduced the risk of urinary tract infections, penile cancer, and some sexually transmitted diseases. So it had potential medical benefits. But then interestingly, he said, but that's not a medical justification for it. And he said because urinary tract infections can be treated by antibiotics, penile cancer is rare and occurs in old age, and circumcision cannot responsibly be viewed as protecting against sexually transmitted diseases. So then I was thinking, well, all right, then the answer is no. But then he started saying, well, would you like to have your son circumcised for religious reasons? I said, well, what do you mean? I'm not religious. And then he said, well, some people have their sons circumcised for religious reasons. I was thinking, well, I don't care about religious reasons. What's that got to do with my son? So then he said, well, some people, circumcise their son for cultural reasons. I'm thinking, well, that sounds stupid. I mean, this is a medical thing. You're a doctor. Why would we do that?
Well, I'm a nurse, and I worked in labor and delivery, so I've probably seen thousands of circumcisions. I held the baby boys down, and at the time that I did that, I didn't give it a second thought. It was what we thought was the right thing to do, and it was just everyone was doing it. When you know better, you do better, and I didn't know better at that time.
I've done hundreds of circumcisions, and I regret every one.
I'm a Jew, and I was raised religious, and I thought that was just something Jews did to their babies. I was very, very sad to find out exactly what circumcision is. I didn't realize how much was being cut. I didn't know anything about the foreskin. I've educated myself, and I think it's wrong to circumcise children for any reason whatsoever.
Most Jews don't realize that in biblical times, circumcision involved cutting the foreskin that extended beyond the glands. It was not a full ripping away of the foreskin. Not that that's okay, but it's very different from what has been done since Hellenic times, when the rabbis were very disturbed that some Jewish men were stretching and tying their foreskins because they were being ridiculed by the Greeks who were in that area at the time. And so then they commanded that the new circumcision had to be peria, was a full reaming of the glands and cutting away of the foreskin. And that's living tissue. I was told that wasn't, and I don't know how anyone who can witness a baby experiencing this cannot understand that this is excruciating pain.
It's painful. It's abusive. It's traumatic. And if anybody who's not in a covenant does it, I think they should be put in prison. I don't think anybody has an excuse for mutilating a child, depriving them of their glans penis and all. I mean, we don't have rights to other people's bodies, and a baby needs to have its rights protected. I think anybody who circumcises a baby, right, is an abuser. Doesn't matter, unless it's like absolutely medically advised because of some complication that a urologist says this baby has to be circumcised. Otherwise, what for?
I had a neighbor who knew I was Jewish and came up to me very proud that she had taken her child to a Jewish doctor to be circumcised, and I just said, why?
I am a Jew, and I question circumcision. I've been questioning circumcision ever since I learned of the rite as a girl. At that time, I questioned circumcision because it seemed wrong to cause pain to infants, and because it seemed strange to surgically alter a healthy, God-given part of the body. As I grew into adulthood, I added questions. I continue to add them. I question circumcision because of its risks. I question it because it is seen by many as a perfunctory act rather than a spiritual one. I question it because it seems to require parents to take advantage of their infant's dependence and weakness. And I question it because of the paradox that those who support infant circumcision often cringe at the idea of circumcision of an older child as a puberty rite.
I address my comments mostly to the Jewish community. As a Jew and a psychologist, I understand the stress that religious communities feel in connection with questioning of circumcision. I raise such questions with the awareness that they may evoke a range of feelings. I empathize and respect these feelings and also acknowledge the profound place that circumcision has in Judaism. However, I raise these questions out of deep caring and compassion for our community generally and our male infants in particular.
Ich bin Humanist, ich bin Atheist, ich bin auch Jude, das ist natürlich wahr. Und wir haben alle so viele Eigenschaften, aber diese Beschneidung ist für mich wirklich barbarisch und ich kann es nicht dulden, dass kleine Babys oder kleine Kinder einfach diese grausame Operation erleben müssen.
I am what's called a secular Jew. Or an ethnic Jew. I am a Jew by ethnic origin. I'm a Jew by birth. It's been there since approximately 500 BCE, instituted by priests. That's another subject, but it was instituted by priests as a symbol of loyalty to the theocracy that they were creating. So it has been part of Jewish culture for something like 2,500 years, but it has changed over time. The procedure itself has changed over time, and certainly we know that Judaism as a religion has changed immensely over time. There's no reason why we can't get rid, at least why many of us anyway, can't get rid of this abominable custom.
You were brought up in a Jewish home. You understand the cultural significance that this means to Jews and to Muslims.
I do. I do understand the cultural significance, and I realise that many people actually haven't given it much thought, because I myself was one of them. Even into adulthood, it wasn't something that you gave much thought. It was a minor snip that didn't cause much harm. The reality, of course, when you look at the evidence, is quite different. This is something that if you ask many intact men, would you like us to just snip off this little bit of your body? They say, for goodness sake, no. This is one of the most sensitive, important parts of my body.
אני עשיתי את זה מאיזושהי חובה, כאילו, אתה מבין מה הכוונה? מחוסר ידע לדעתי. מחוסר ידע גם הרבה. זה גם השפעה של חברה והכל. הרבה מאוד השפעה של חברה. שאם אני רוצה ללכת לצבא, ואני רציתי להתגייס לצבא ולהיות חלק מהחברה, כאילו, הישראלית, אז אני אצטרך לעשות ברית מילה, כי אני הרגיש לא בנוח כלפי אנשים כאילו אחרים. אז בגלל זה אני הלכתי ועשיתי ברית מילה. וזה היה טיפשי מאוד. מאוד.
אף פעם לא אמר לי למה לא עשית לי את זה. הוא אמר לי, אם אני רוצה להיות שייך לחברה, הילד הוא צריך להיות כל כך חריף עם עצמו, שלעשות לו פצע לעצמו. במקום איפה אתה צריך ללמוד לאהוב. איפה אתה צריך להתחיל להרגיש את האורגזמה, איפה אתה עושה אהבה עם אשתך, איפה אתה משחרר פיפי, שזה כיף, זה כיף לעשות פיפי, נכון? אז למה לעשות פצע בדיוק איפה אנחנו צריכים להיות הכי משוחררים בעולם? אז אני שואלת לכולם כאן, למה עושים ברית מילה? בשביל לזכור, לסבול ולא ליהנות?
The foreskin is there for a reason. It protects the baby against soiling with feces and urine as an infant. There are 10 to 20,000 nerve endings compacted in the foreskin.
I, as an anatomist and neuroanatomist, can tell you that foreskin is very highly innervated, and when separated, that is a serious injury.
Some parents have very strong beliefs that their babies should be circumcised. Either this is from social or cultural or things they've heard. Rarely are they informed enough to know that they are damaging their babies by circumcising them.
In Israel alone, hundreds of baby boys are rushed every year to emergency rooms and operating rooms to treat complications following the amputation of the foreskin.
They say it's safe in the AAP in 2012. That's knowingly false and misleading. It's contradicted by the AAP statement in 1971 that circumcision can lead to metitus, septicemia, hemorrhage, and mutilation. They don't say that anymore. It's contradicted by the AMA in 1999. The science is deeply flawed. The DOC has said the policy statement is fully tainted by easily identified conflicts of interest and financial motives. This should not be considered honest medical advice. The AAP understates the risk. They say the risk of injury is 0.2%. Well, they are only looking at serious injury. But a study they cite found the risk of serious injury of 2%. The real risk of injury is probably 10% or more. Then they admit they don't know the risk. Well, they can't claim it's safe if they don't know the risk. And if they don't know the risk, it's because they don't want to find out. They haven't made any effort to find out. These are intentional omissions. They forget to tell parents, physicians, your child might lose his entire penis, he might die.
First, there is the harm to infants. In a comprehensive review of medical literature, investigators concluded newborn infant responses to pain are, quote, similar to but greater than those observed in adult subjects, unquote. This is the reason for numerous studies to find a safe and effective anesthetic for circumcision. There is no such anesthetic. At best, it only temporarily reduces the pain and sometimes does not even do that. Some infants do not cry because they go into shock from the overwhelming pain of the surgery. Researchers found that behavioral changes after circumcision include altered sleep patterns, activity levels, and mother-infant interactions, extended crying, and disruptions in feeding and bonding. Infants may also withdraw after circumcision and be unable to communicate their needs. Circumcised newborn infants have increased pain responses 6 months later. This change may represent lasting neurological effects and a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
The trauma early in life is the most severe and the most damaging. And that's because the child has no defense mechanisms and no perspective and no experience in life, and they are just hurt and shocked, and they go into shock. And that's the beginning of it all.
It wasn't until, well, it was many years later that I finally took a step to start learning about circumcision. And I was devastated. I was really beyond devastated. And my heart has never been whole since. Had I known then what I know now, I never ever would have permitted this to happen to my boys. And I know they would have been Jews anyway because their mother is a Jew and she brought them up with Hebrew and with holidays and with Jewish education. But they would have been spared this massive trauma. And circumcision is trauma. I was told that the foreskin was just a little flap of skin. That's a lie. I was told that it is simply redundant, useless tissue. That's a lie. I was told that since that it's basically painless. That's a lie. I was told that because babies don't remember the pain, therefore it's inconsequential. That's a big lie. What I've learned about circumcision, I've learned a lot. And I know now that the foreskin is essential, highly innervated sexual tissue, that taking it away matters for life. I know that the foreskin covers up to 1/2 of an adult male's erect penis. I know that when that tissue is taken away, that the glands, the head of the penis, becomes externalized, which it was not designed to be, and that as a result it becomes desensitized, it loses its mucosal covering, it becomes thickened and keratinized, and that man experiences a secondary loss of sensitivity, which grows greater the older he gets. I also know that trauma to neonates is highly significant. We now know that the cortisol levels in the amygdala rise measurably and acutely during a circumcision, and they do not go back to baseline on day 1 after a circumcision. They do not go back to baseline after the first week, nor after the first month, nor after 6 months. So circumcision is altering neurological response, and that's very serious. None of these things is a mitzvah.
Physicians have defrauded parents. They understate the disadvantages. They don't mention or they deny pain. They've claimed babies don't feel pain. They say pain is well tolerated. Well, who says? The truth is there's no anesthetic more than half of the time. It's ineffective. Circumcision is extremely painful. It increases sensitivity to pain. It has an unknown effect on the neonatal brain. And parents who watch a circumcision are likely to regret having consented when they see what it's really like. This is a fraud.
But we have been lied to, L-I-E-D, lied to by the medical profession for 100 years about circumcision. You will read in medical textbooks that circumcision is absolutely not painful. It's impossible for it not to be painful.
Studies have shown that the baby's nervous system is hyperdeveloped. They feel pain even more than adults do. I mean, their blood pressure goes sky high, their enzymes, their steroid levels in the body go way up. So it is an extraordinarily painful procedure, even when anesthetic is used.
I know that the most painful part of my life was the whole circumcision experience.
I was born 43 years ago in Tel Aviv, a healthy baby with a perfect body. 8 days after I was born, one man held my tiny legs down while another man cut a part of my penis off with a knife. I was in pain, I screamed, I bled. It's over. But the part that was cut off from my penis is forever gone.
Family members have told many stories about the day of my bris, all of them including my uncle's fainting at the sight of all the blood that was spraying all over the place. The screaming, the crying, the horror of those who hadn't experienced a bris before, experiencing it for the first time and being in shock.
There's no memory of what happened to us when we were little. And because we have no memory, it's always thought, well, if I can't remember it, it can't have effect. Which is so clearly not true and proven by in so many ways. Dreams, hypnotism, all of these things bring up stuff that are completely out of our conscious awareness during our waking life. So all of this is going on inside of us, and it's held within us, and it's never forgotten.
Avoidance symptoms explain why there has been virtually no public discussion of circumcision by those affected. The expressed reasons for circumcision conceal an iceberg of underlying psychological factors. Circumcising a son reenacts the father's unresolved traumatic emotional pain connected with his circumcision and allows the father to avoid confronting this emotional pain. Psychologists note that this compulsion to repeat the trauma is another classic PTSD symptom.
As a man said to me not long ago, I circumcised my son because I didn't want to think about circumcision. There was
I didn't really even know what it was that was inside me in terms of any memories in my body. I just didn't want to deal with it. It was much easier just to let it be done than to question it or think about it or reflect upon it, make it as a conscious choice.
אבל בעיקר הרגשתי את התסכול שיש לי שני ילדים שבגלל חוסר מחשבה וחוסר בחירה גרמתי להם נזק. לא חשבתי על זה, זה עבר לי ככה. בכלל זה לא היה במסגרת השיקולים שלי. אצל חדווה זה היה אחרת. חדווה כן כאבה, אני אפילו לא כאבתי. לא כאב לי שהילדים שלי עברו את הברית. ולא חשתי שהם עוברים טראומה. זה פשוט לא נגע בי. אני חושב שאנשים בדבר כל כך מהותי שיבחרו לעשות ברית, בסדר. אבל שיבחרו, שאנשים יהיו מוכנים לקבל את זה שהשוני בהם הוא משהו שצריך להתגאות בו, לא משהו שצריך להסתיר אותו. שונה, זה טוב, זה לא רע.
זה משהו מקובל פה, ולא רוצה שהוא יהיה חריג, לא רוצה שהוא יהיה עם איזשהו תסבוך. זה המניע העיקרי. שזה מיותר, אני כן חושבת שכל העניין של הלימוד הוא מיותר פשוט מיותר.
חריגות, זה בעצם היה, בשורה התחתונה זה היה הדבר הכי מפחיד. מי אני שילך נגד משהו שהוא מאוד מקובע בחברה שלנו, ואני בדרך כלל לא טיפוס שיוצא נגד, או עושה דברים שונים, אני הולכת עם הזרם.
ואמרתי לה שאני לא יוכל לעזור לה, אני לא אעשה מזה מלחמה, אני לא אהיה שם. לא יכול, היא צריך לעשות את זה לבד. אני לא אעזור לה לא לארגן ולא להזמין את המועל ולא... אני חושב שזה היה איזשהו ניסיון שלי ככה ללחוץ או להעלות את זה יותר מוחשי. ולא הייתי מוכנה לוותר, אמרתי, אני בקטע של החריגות, זה קשה לי מדי, זה כנראה הבעיה האישית שלי להתמודד משהו אגואיסטי אולי שאני לא אהיה מסוגל להתמודד עם זה, אז אני אעשה לו ברית. ופתאום זה עשה את הסוויץ' שהחלטתי שאני לא עושה ברית. שאני לא מסוגלת, האקט הזה של לקחת את הילד ולתת אותו למועל, בעצם זה בשבילי היה כמו לשים אותו למזבח ולחתוך אותו בשר החי, שזה נראה לי דבר פשוט בלתי אפשרי.
Infant circumcision began as a ritualized Jewish practice somewhere around 500 BCE after they returned from the Babylonian exile to Judea, when a priestly theocracy was established with the construction of the Second Temple. We have pretty good evidence that the priests at that time needed to have some kind of assurance that fathers would remain loyal to the theocracy and that they would raise their sons to be loyal to the theocracy. What circumcision does is demonstrate to the assembled public that the father is willing to subject his child, his most valued property, his son, his progeny, his posterity, is willing to subject his child to dangerous surgery.
Supposing some charismatic rabbi gets up in the synagogue and said, I had a dream last night that God came to me and told me from now on we have to cut off part of the penis of little baby boys in order for them to be fully brought into the covenant of Judaism. What would you think about that?
If it's covenantal, why isn't there a covenant with women? You know, why doesn't God make a covenant with us that women could also? Let's cut off our left ear. And, you know, Jews would be known that they have no left ear, and Jewish men and Jewish women. Let's do it to 8-day-old babies. I mean, it makes as much sense, right?
Sogar nach der Halacha, also die offizielle rechtliche Überlieferung, was Judentum angeht, ist man Jude nicht, weil man beschnitten ist. Zum Beispiel die Frauen sind nicht beschnitten und man kann Jüdin sein, aber man ist Jude, weil die Mutter Jüdin ist oder weil man konvertiert hat. Ich habe eine breitere Definition, aber das ist noch was anderes. Sogar für diese Leute, die entweder Mutter oder Konversion betrachten, da sprechen sie überhaupt nicht von Beschneidung. Also es gehört nicht primär zur jüdischen Identität und im Gegenteil finde ich, dass manche es leicht haben. Sie verstümmeln ihre Kinder, gehen nie zur Synagoge, machen überhaupt nichts Jüdisches, halten nicht koscher, machen gar nichts und sagen, ja, ich bin Jude, weil ich meinen Sohn zerstümmelt habe.
I'm Jewish, and I'm not a religious Jew. And I think I can speak for many other Jews who know that what I'm about to say is true. We don't go to temple on Saturday. We're not kosher. We don't observe all the laws. But circumcision we cling to tenaciously, I believe, because it's a helpless infant. And it's nothing that we have to do. And we can be very passive about it and feel like we're being good Jews.
36 years later, my son was born. 2 days before his planned circumcision, while searching online for recommendations about the Dr. Mohel we chose, I stumbled upon the following paragraph from the Guide for the Perplexed by Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher. Quote, "As regards circumcision, I think that one of its objects is to limit sexual intercourse and to weaken the organ of generation as far as possible, and thus cause men to be moderate. Some people believe that circumcision is to remove a defect in men's formation. But everyone can easily reply, how can products of nature be deficient so as to require external completion, especially as the use of the foreskin to that organ is evident? The bodily injury caused to that organ is exactly that which is desired. This is, as I believe, the best reason for the commandment of concerning circumcision." End quote. I was shocked. I realized that the Jewish motivation for circumcision was diminishing sexual pleasure, the same motivation as the one behind female genital cutting. I was so amazed by this text, so I went on to read every piece of information I could find about the part that was cut off from my penis. The more I read and understood the anatomy and functions of the foreskin, the more it became impossible to escape the painful and enraging realization that my body was violated, that my penis was damaged and diminished in its capacity to sense pleasure, and that I will never be able to experience sex and enjoy sex and as nature intended it.
Circumcision is not just about aesthetics, it's not just about a commandment in the Bible, and it's not just about health. The big reason, it's like the first reason that they started doing it was to prevent males from having this animal-like aggression, like to prevent them from, wanting to sleep around. Doctors will even say when the skin is cut off, there's less sensitivity. When that sensitivity gets cut off, it's like it calms them down. It's like without it, when you see a girl, it's like they believe if you're not circumcised, they believe it's just going to overcome you and you're just going to want to do whatever regardless because you want that pleasure. When a guy gets circumcised, it's believed that he's less aggressive. It is not for aesthetic reasons. They don't want their boy growing up and having his hand down his pants 24/7 and having to deal with him looking at his sisters. They also think you're more likely to have incest.
קודם כל אנחנו עושים את המצווה כי ככה השם ציווה, בלי שום טעם. אבל הרמב"ם כותב אחד הדברים של המילה זה למעט את כוח התאווה. כאילו העולה היא קצת מגבירה את כוח התאווה, ולפי הרמב"ם זה למעט, אחד הדברים זה למעט. אז ככה מכיוון שאנחנו לא עם נבחר ולא עם הספר ועם השכל, עם הרוחני, לא כל כך הצד הגשמי והתאווה, אז אחד המצוות זה למעט את התאווה.
My father is a rabbi, so from a very early age I was trained in religious teachings and had full exposure to all of the Jewish rituals. I was taught to believe that circumcision was very special, that it made me special, that somehow it made me elite, it made me part of a greater family of Jews, and also that I was better in some ways because I had been circumcised. I was more civilized, I was more clean, I was more disciplined.
People who circumcise and have this belief that they don't, express, do not think very highly of people who are uncircumcised. It's not, we're all equal. I mean, it's like, and everything else, they might love you no matter what color or anything. But if you're not circumcised, in their mind, they're like, you are not getting near my daughter. Belief systems that believe in circumcision as a way of life and as a command, it's like, when they look at uncircumcised people, they don't want their daughters by them. They don't want their kids by them because they believe they're more likely to rape. They believe they're women. They believe they're more likely to molest little girls. It's it's a whole like underground belief system. The reason goes way back, thousands of years. It's the belief that an uncircumcised male is like a dog. That's why in the Bible they call them uncircumcised dogs. They will basically sleep with anything, like a dog on a person's leg or a couch. Like when people get up and say, I'm not circumcised, they have no idea what people are thinking. The first reaction of these people are like, oh my goodness, I'm never gonna let them in my house. Like, people will, when they have sleepovers, they'll ask the parents, are they circumcised? That's why Jewish people, that's one reason, there's a lot of reasons. That's why Jewish people like to stay within themselves, because if they mix with uncircumcised boys, they believe these boys are not circumcised. They might rape or molest my daughter. Of course, they went farther with people like eunuchs who had to guard the princess, and they just, chopped it all off. They made them, not able to have kids and not able to want to have kids, kind of a thing. We don't do that, but we still do the circumcision part. A lot of people, the only reason they do it is because the dad was circumcised, so he wants the son to look like him, or they think it's the healthiest way, on and on and on. And really, that's not the original reason. That's not why they did it, even before it was commanded in the Old Testament.
Of many conversations that I've had as a member of the Jewish community with Jewish males who I know who have been circumcised and would want to circumcise their children, and the reasons they've given have been extremely diverse. It's not always an issue of pinpointing a specific part of Genesis or talking about a divine obligation or mandate. Often people will talk about the value for them of tradition, of continuity, and a sense of connection with an ancient lineage, or of the importance for them of having their child fit into the community, of instilling a particular identity for them.
I think that parents who circumcise their kids, they do it for the right reasons, actually. I think they do it out of love, and I think they do it to pass on a tradition and a sense of belonging. Well, it's not like other religious practices. You can ask a child to wear a headscarf or go to church or be baptized. All those things will not affect you permanently. I can't put my foreskin back on, and it's irreversible, and it's something that I feel every day.
Even if religion were to be given a special status, such that if a parent said that it was because of religion that they wanted to alter their children's genitals, it follows that the circumcision of female as well as male children could be permitted on this basis.
If he was born a girl, this would not have been allowed. And so that is a question I still don't understand, how we can do this to our sons and not our daughters.
We need to think very seriously about who is defining the sacred in Judaism and why people feel compelled to repeat what really is sexual abuse and torture of our baby boys. And I know that's very strong language, but when we really look at this honestly, there's no way around it. There's absolutely no way around it. And I remember being so appalled when I learned about the reality of female genital mutilation and thinking, how could anyone possibly countenance such a thing? And once I started learning more about circumcision, which is a euphemism, I started hearing my people, and it used to be me too, say the exact same things that the people who are justifying female circumcision say. It's our identity. It's been done for thousands and thousands of years. This is who we are. We'll be socially ostracized if we don't do it. We will not be attractive to the opposite sex if we don't do it. It's ugly. And now in American society, we say it's pathological. We pathologize the foreskin. And all of these things are false. And we need to understand how we have participated in this.
I feel that it's such a stain on mankind, this circumcision, this ritual. It's unbelievable. And I feel that only many years in the future we will understand what is this dark pit of this dark hole in the soul of humans that need to do this sacrificing babies.
I am from the United States. I'm from a Jewish family. I was raised Jewish. I have seen friends, colleagues, people I've known. I've heard so many stories as an activist against circumcision in the United States, where it's very common. Stories of lifelong pain, lifelong depression, suicide, lifelong loss of sexual function due to circumcision that they did not consent to as a child. I believe that forced body modifications are for consenting adults only.
They say it's harmless, but they say a clitoral nick is harmful, but invasive surgery is not. How can that be? It can't be. The truth is, as discussed, it harms all boys and men. They're restrained. It's invasive surgery. It's painful, amputates a body part, reduces the size of the penis, radically changes its appearance, leaves a scar, impairs men's sex lives, and possibly causes psychological harm. It's a fraud.
I don't have any of the complications I mentioned, like extremely tight skin or bleeding, but I know I've met people with these problems, many people with these problems, and they never understood why. People do not attribute the problems they have to circumcision, because when they're a child and they're circumcised as an infant, a lot of the complications they do not know are caused by circumcision. They just think this is normal, how my body is. You know, I do have painful urination sometimes because of meatal stenosis, which occurs very commonly when you circumcise infants. Now this is just seen as normal because it's, you know, the urethra shrinks when you circumcise someone as an infant. The urethral opening gets smaller. It's called meatal stenosis. And normally it's not treated because they still can urinate, but they never attribute this, that this is a problem or this is not abnormal.
So the defense of male circumcision, even among religious people, is that there's some health benefits, right? But this is not really true. There's a hypothetical, potential, and rare benefit that might occur. It is not a universal benefit. So if you have cancer and we cut out the cancer, there's an immediate benefit. But if you have a circumcision, it's only hypothetical and speculative that you'll ever receive any benefit from having been circumcised. So it's important to note that. And in medicine, that's really not how we practice medicine on any other part of the body. We don't go cutting things off thinking that there could be potentially a medical benefit. We wait until there is a problem and then we address it. Because as you mentioned, surgery is always painful, it's risky, there's scarring, there's deformity. That is all true with male circumcision.
I'm not going to argue with the fact that it is a lesion that's made in the skin. That is the reality of it, yes. I never ever bought into what we were taught, that there was a health benefit to this. I felt that was the kind of argument by certain groups that felt that eating kosher was healthy, that circumcision was healthy, that ritual bathing was healthy, separation of men and women during the cycle was healthy. I felt this was all apologetics. I never bought into that. It is what it is.
This is an example of medicine borrowing from religion, understanding that the procedure, any procedure that was requested or in fact required by God must have not only spiritual benefits but health benefits as well.
Beneficial medically? No.
So you don't feel that there's any medical benefit to the procedure?
Not as long as families can keep the area clean. I don't see how there's value to it from a health standpoint.
As long as a young man can be taught to clean the foreskin, then there's no reason why cleanliness in that area has to be any less important than cleanliness in any other area of the body.
This is one of the myths. See, one of the myths is not true. It's a lie. These are one of the lies we're told about circumcision. It's going to prevent cancer. It's going to prevent venereal disease. It's going to make cleanliness easier. Not true. In 1955, a Columbia University obstetrician made the point, and correctly so, that smegma, which is a material produced out of the foreskin, is produced in all mammals, the horse in copious quantities. Can you imagine what would happen if somebody called for the routine circumcision of baby horses?
In the past, often phimosis was diagnosed, the failure of the foreskin to retract, and physicians may have believed that at some time, but at some point physicians learned that it may take until puberty to retract, so that's a false claim, and it's still used today.
The best message that we could give to parents and doctors, nurses, anybody that takes care of babies, babysitters, is leave the foreskin alone. Don't retract it, don't cut it, don't damage it, don't do anything to it.
And they're still talking about penile cancer, and the AAP says it may prevent it in 1 in 909 men. But this is misleading and intended to frighten. It's one of the rarest diseases in the Western world. There's no epidemiological proof that it reduces the risk of penile cancer. Boys are not at risk of penile cancer, and it's easy to prevent by good hygiene and not smoking. The American Cancer Society says it's improper to make this claim. The AMA called this claim unjustified in 1999. Physicians would not remove breast buds if it were legal to prevent breast cancer, which is many times more common than penile cancer.
The first claim that really became popular, I think, was that this would discourage boys from masturbating. After a point, it became increasingly obvious that treatment in and of itself, curing, was not really going to work, that these claims were spurious. But as that happened, they shifted ground and began to make claims instead for prevention instead of treatment. First, that circumcision would prevent cancer of the penis. Then it became cancer of the prostate. Then it became cancer of the cervix. So each time, as a particular kind of illness became important, circumcision was advanced as the preventive for it. When one claim was discredited, the next one appeared. And of course, we're still dealing with that now, with urinary tract infections, the latest favorite claim, along, of course, with the most popular of all, HIV/AIDS, the claim that this will save the world from HIV/AIDS, circumcising men and babies.
There clearly is not any evidence in the modern U.S. data about the likelihood of catching an STD being prevented by being circumcised. If you think about the situation in San Francisco among gay white men in the 80s, I would estimate certainly on the order of 75 to 80% of them were circumcised, and half of the gay men in San Francisco contracted HIV for a period of time. So if there is any prophylaxis, it's sure as hell not much of one.
Physicians claim actual benefits where none exist. It's like a vaccine. It reduces HIV by 60%. Well, that's highly misleading. The absolute risk reduction is 1.3%. It applies to African men who would only benefit for a short time, and the AAP concedes that the numbers don't apply to infants in the United States.
In the early part of the 20th century and the last decades of the 19th century, physicians were looking for cures. Germ theory of disease didn't come about until about 1895. We didn't know what caused diseases. Somebody came along with an idea, everybody listened to him. The most prolific writer on circumcision health benefits was a doctor named Peter Charles Remendino. He said, this procedure will prevent or cure about 100 ailments. Asthma, epilepsy, gout, rectal prolapse, feeble-mindedness, insanity. You name the disease, it was prevented or cured by circumcision. Now, I ignore this book. It's of no importance to me. Why? It was written in 1891. What is important is that this book was reprinted word for word in 1974. And in 1974, and even now, you will find this book used as medical reference in American medical journals. This, to me, is a disgrace.
The AAP says specific benefits identified include prevention of UTIs, cancer, and some STDs, including HIV. Then this was publicized widely. It's on the front page of the New York Times. That circumcision has many health benefits. This is a fraud on boys, parents, Medicaid officials, and the government. It's knowingly false. The AAP itself concedes that there's a remote chance of benefiting any child. They instruct physicians what to tell parents. They even have talking points, which are actually selling points, how to handle objections from parents. Physicians use high-pressure sales tactics. They solicit the parents of all newborns. And American parents make easy targets. They don't know anything about circumcision. They trust the doctors, and they're culturally biased themselves, and the men usually have foreskins. They're surprised. They have to decide on the spot in maybe 2 minutes. You wouldn't buy a car in 2 minutes. The mothers are, quote, out of it, exhausted, hormonal drug, so they can't think straight. And then the fathers want the sons to look like them. And then if the parents say no, physicians often badger them. Then this is a fraud. These tactics would not be allowed elsewhere. If you bought a vacuum cleaner in Massachusetts, you'd have 3 days to say, I don't want it. But if you say yes to circumcision, you can't revoke the decision.
In 2006, the British Medical Association issued guidance, and they stated that unnecessarily invasive procedures should not be used where alternative, less invasive techniques are equally efficient and available. Therefore, to circumcise for therapeutic reasons, where medical research has shown other techniques to be at least as effective and less invasive, would be unethical and inappropriate. In 2010, as we know, the Royal Dutch Medical Association, KNMG, adopted an official viewpoint of deterrence with broad support from medical associations within the Netherlands. They said non-therapeutic circumcision of male minors conflicts with the child's right to autonomy and physical integrity. In 2013, all 5 children's ombudsmen of the Nordic countries, together with paediatric experts, issued the joint statement headlined, "Let the Boys Decide on Ritual Circumcision." And they said that circumcision without medical indication conflicts with Articles 12 and 24.3 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which guarantees the child the right to express their own views and to be protected from traditional harms. And most recently, 18 months ago, the Danish Medical Association said that circumcision of boys without a medical indication is ethically unacceptable when the procedure is carried out without the informed consent of the person undergoing surgery, so it shouldn't take place under 18 years old.
After 6 days of my life, someone decided to lop a bit of my body off without me having much say in the matter, really.
It makes the circumcision of baby boys even worse, because that's really a fait accompli. There's nothing to do about it. If it's done early enough, the boys will have no rights to stop it. And I think that tells a lot about the circumcision thing, that actually before the children have reached the age of informed consent, before that, even 11 years, they have the right to stop circumcision and say no. But if you do it while before they can speak, perhaps that's the limit, then it is illegal. Then it can be done. That's crazy. I mean, this is a treachery of the children.
I think it's a really archaic practice that circumcision, whether for male or female, is a violent act. And where is this idea that nature is so mistaken? It's a craziness to me. It's an insanity. And the trauma, the pain that's inflicted at such an early age, when the infant is most sensitive, most helpless, most vulnerable, and then to have that as the welcome instead of the mother's breast and the warmth and the transition from the inside the womb to the outside is a travesty.
We are told that circumcision may have some health benefits, but the healthiest babies in the world are the babies who are not being circumcised. Why is it that in countries where fewer than 2% of the babies are circumcised at any time during their life, why are those countries the countries where we have the healthiest babies, the healthiest children, and the healthiest adult? So what I would say to obstetricians and to any parent is that we can let the baby decide when the baby is of consenting age, as opposed to doing something to a newborn that he has no way to integrate into his understanding, that causes him an extreme amount of pain if the pain medication isn't used correctly, and that causes lasting damage on his body. We don't have to rush into it. We can give babies the choice when they're old enough to decide. If you want to be circumcised, that is your choice, but you need to be an adult, able to make that decision about what happens to your penis.
It's illegal for females to be genitally mutilated at birth, and the same right should extend to the male. It's only a lack of knowledge and understanding about the very function and structure and purpose of the male reproductive and sensual organ that is the penis that arise to create an atmosphere where lack of knowledge and atrocity for innocent children that have not given their consent, or that would never give any consent in the future, to having their sacred region mutilated and destroyed.
Jeg synes, at mennesket ret til sin egen krop er hellig, og den synes jeg ikke, man skal pille ved.
1. Circumcision is extremely painful and traumatic, causes some infants to go into shock, results in behavioral and neurological changes, and no anesthetic effectively prevents circumcision pain. 2. Circumcision is associated with over 20 different potential complications, including heavy bleeding, infection, surgical injury, and in rare cases, death. 3. The foreskin on the average adult male is about 12 square inches of highly erogenous tissue, which protects the head of the penis, enhances sexual pleasure, and facilitates intercourse. Circumcision advocates who are doctors have admitted they do not know the functions of the foreskin. 4. No national medical organization in the world recommends circumcision. 5. Circumcision is associated with erectile dysfunction in the medical literature. A preliminary study found that circumcised men were 4.5 times more likely to use an erectile dysfunction drug.
I understood the effects of circumcision slowly. I think right around when I hit puberty, around 10, 11, 12, I started to realize more things, that the glands, the head of the penis should be covered. I also experienced difficulties masturbating, and my first experience, I was bleeding and chafing. So I didn't consciously understand that it was because of circumcision, but I started to notice all these bad effects. And then once I saw the oil when I was 16, I connected them. And I realized, like, this is what they did. These are the effects.
A lot of people I know, growing up, when you talk about masturbation, like, oh, it bleeds every time. Because the skin is so tight, and they remove so much skin, that the skin tears. Or erections were really painful. Because the skin is tight, and cannot accommodate the penis when it is fully erect. Now, they don't know that this was caused by circumcision. They just think this is normal.
I had been searching for a reason why I was having these physical issues, and every doctor and psychologist that I went to more than one, told me that these issues are all in your head. Nobody even suggested any thought about circumcision, and me being a traumatized human, I did not connect the dots. I knew I was circumcised, but I did not think that this could have any way caused me issues. I don't know why I didn't think that, but that was part of the brainwashing.
למשל, יש אנשים שמדווחים שהם לא יכולים לגמור במשגל וגינלי. הם חייבים אוננות. וזה נובע מכך שכמעט לא נשארו להם רצפטורים רגישים למגע. פשוט אין שם לחץ. זה בדרך כלל באזור של הצלקת של הפרנולום. שם צריך להיות מופעל לחץ. הם צריכים גירוי ידני מאוד ממוקד וחזק בשביל להרגיע לאורגזמה. רק כשאנשים כאלה באים לסקסולוגים, במקום להגיד להם, רבותיי, יש לכם איבר מין פגום בגלל מה שעשו לכם בגיל 8 או באיזה גיל שעשו לכם את זה, ואתם תצטרכו לחיות עם זה ככה, וזה לא אשמתכם. הם אומרים להם, תלמדו, תנסו, אולי אתם לא חושבים נכון, לא מתרכזים נכון, יש לכם בעיה פסיכולוגית, כמו אימפוטנציה. כמובן שהסקסולוגים לא תפסו את הבעיה. הם בכלל לא מודעים לכך שהעורלה זה דבר שחסר.
Circumcision is nothing less and nothing more than genital mutilation, male genital mutilation, in this case that we're discussing here, removal not just a useless snip of skin or a part of the penis, but it is the destruction and removal of the entire sacred realm of sensuality. It is the structure of the internal organ. Most people don't realize this, in this country, but the penis is an internal organ, which consists of mucosa, mucous membrane, an internal environment. The foreskin consists of 15 square inches of erogenous tissue that is the center of sexuality, and it is quite comparable to the internal genitalia of a girl or a woman.
אתה יודע, אנחנו דיברנו על זה רבות בינינו. מה יקרה שלנו אם יהיה לנו ילד? לצערנו זה לא צלח באופן טבעי, ולא הייתה לנו את הסוגיה הזו, אבל אנחנו באמת חשבנו שאולי אנחנו לא נעשה את זה. ואז שאמרנו אולי לא נבצע את הברית, חשבנו ישר מה באמת על הדבר הידוע, מה יקרה לו בבית ספר?
המקלחת בצופים.
ובצבא ובצופים ולפני זה. וזה לא מטריד אותך?
לפני 11 שנה זה הטריד אותי כשהתחלתי לחקור את הנושא.
ואני מלתי גם שני ילדיי, לא בטוח שאני...
אני חושב שהשאלה הזאת של מה יקרה לו במקלחת, מה יקרה לו בצבא, צריכה לבוא אחרי שלומדים וחוקרים את הנושא עצמו. זאת אומרת, אחת הבעיות שבחברה הישראלית זה שההורים לא לומדים מה המשמעות של העורלה, מה המשמעות של האנטומיה הטבעית של איבר המין השלם של הילד, לפני שהם הולכים וקורטים את העורלה. והם עושים את הקריטה של העולם מתוך הפחד של מה יהיה, לפני שהם לומדים על המשמעות האנטומית של הדבר הזה. הרי הזכרים נולדים עם העורלה.
תסבר את אוזנינו.
אז קודם כל העורלה היא האזור חישה העיקרי באיבר המין של הזכר. זאת אומרת, הריכוז הכי גבוה של עצבים, של קצות עצבים שרגישים למגע מיני, נמצאים בעורלה.
בסדר, יהודים עדיין נהנים
מהמגע הזה. אבל הם יכולים ליהנות הרבה יותר. אם אתה לוקח וקורט את החלק הכי רגיש באיבר המין למגע מיני, ואתה חושף את העטרה שבאופן טבעי אמורה להיות מוגנת בעורלה, אתה משנה באופן אנטומי את האיבר ואתה משנה את המכניקה של המשגל. האימפקט שיש לזה מבחינת ההנאה המינית, גם על הגבר וגם על האישה, הוא עצום.
The male is supposed to have loose skin that slides back and forth over the shaft of the penis. It keeps the glands of the penis as an internal organ.
As I've grown older, I've realized that circumcision desensitizes you. And when you get older, there's a natural desensitization also. So suddenly it adds up and it gets to be a problem.
I'm Jewish myself. Both my parents are Jewish. And I was circumcised as a baby boy. And I can confirm what Christian was saying, that me and several of my Jewish friends can confirm that there will be troubles in due time with circumcision, even if you are circumcised as a baby.
Then they say it won't affect your son's sex life. But this is contradicted by the AAP 1999 reported more varied sexual practices in circumcised men and less sensation and satisfaction. It removes half the penile covering. It's replete with nerves, highly erogenous. It's the most sensitive part of the penis. Men who restore report improved sex lives. So it does affect sensitivity. This is not part of a medical license to cause pain and reduce pleasure. It's a fraud.
Multiple studies describe the sexual harm. Circumcision removes about a third of the erogenous tissue on the penile shaft, including several kinds of specialized nerves, resulting in thickening and progressive desensitization of exposed erogenous tissue. The adult foreskin is a double layer. Movable sleeve of approximately 75 square centimeters. It protects the penile head, enhances sexual pleasure, and facilitates intercourse. One man compared having sex after an adult circumcision to, quote, seeing in black and white instead of seeing in color, unquote. Research shows that circumcised men are more likely to have erectile dysfunction, orgasm difficulties, and premature ejaculation. They are 4.5 times more likely to use erectile dysfunction drugs. Female partners of circumcised men have more problems with sexual function, fulfillment, and painful intercourse. Several medical societies recognize the long-term psychological effects of circumcision. Based on the collective responses of thousands of men, These effects include anger toward parents and others, sense of loss, shame, fear, distrust, grief, relationship difficulties, depression, sexual anxieties, reduced emotional expression, and empathy, low self-esteem, and avoidance of intimacy. Many of these circumcised men wish they had been given a choice at a later time rather than having it forced on them when they were too young to resist.
Min klare overbevisning er, at selvfølgelig er det et overgreb. Men hvis man ikke mener, at det er et overgreb, så kan man jo diskutere det her fra nu af, og jeg ved ikke, hvor lang tid.
It's wrong to take a sharp blade and to cut, to dismember, to mutilate that is doing by rape.
So this is the right.
This is the greatest violation of human rights.
I think you're right. What is that circumcision?
Well, I said, you know what? It's a surgery that he's not consenting to. So later on, if he wants to do it, let's do it.
You're right.
I said I respect it. With the Jewish community, I get it, and part of the faith, cool.
Right.
But it's
what's
like,
the point? I agree with you. I mean, you mean to tell me somewhere it's right to cut off skin on your penis? I mean, that's a man-made myth.
Right. Well, actually, Carl Kellogg, back in the day, who was a Puritan, thought that it would be more sanitary, and it became sort of this, it took on a
It's a
life
mutilation.
It's a mutilation, and then it's a big business for doctors now.
Circumcision results in long-term symptoms that fit the pattern of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as avoidance of feelings and stimuli related to the trauma, reduced emotional response, and for some, a tendency to anger.
I think the first time that I really felt angry that I was circumcised was when I was about 16 and I went to some family wedding and my parents pointed out the mohel who circumcised me and I felt really, really angry.
If I could speak directly to the mohel who botched my circumcision, I would say how can you fathom removing the blood from an infant with your mouth? How do you justify that in your mind? Is that the best way to do things? Is that how did that practice come about? Is that something that, is that a joke? Or is that really what goes down? I understand that there is a need to keep the area clean, but does it please you? What was your first, how did you get into that? How do you practice for that sort of thing? What compels one to go into that practice? Are you getting paid crazy amounts of money? What do you say when you come home to your family at the end of the day? And how did it go, honey? Well, there was a lot of blood. I sucked most of it away. Let's eat.
Grown up, kind of furious about this thing that happened to me. Maybe from about adolescence when I really first started to understand what had taken place.
I just kept bringing it up, and there were serious arguments, right? So I would have a Sunday dinner with my family. And I would go to Sunday dinner and bring up circumcision. And of course, my Jewish grandma was there who will never budge on circumcision. And I would bring it up, and my dad would be like, all right, maybe it's time to go.
Jeg vil sige, at det har haft kæmpe konsekvenser for vores familie. Fordi jeg må jo konstatere, at mine forældre har overladt mig til at blive skåret i. Og det er altså ikke sådan, man udøver sine forældregerning.
How much of your genitals now, whether you're circumcised, a man or a woman, how many of your part of your penis or of your vulva can be removed without it affecting sex? I'm probably thinking most of you think, well, if you removed any of this tissue, I would have less sensation. There would be less there. This would be problematic if tissue from my genitals were removed right now. And this doesn't change when you do it to an infant. When you do it to an infant, they just don't know because they never had the opportunity to have their whole body. And that feeling of not ever having the opportunity to have my whole body makes me feel very, very violated, and I am not alone.
I'm very angry of my parents that cut my penis.
I don't know that I was not born Jewish. I know I was not circumcised until 8 years old. I remember to be in a hospital with my arms on the sides of the bed, tape, so I could not move my arms. I remember to be angry. I had no control over the circumstances in which I became a child. And they robbed me of that. They owe me something.
זה נכון, כן עשיתי תביעת נזיקים נגד ההורים שלי, על העוול ונזק שגרמו לי ההורים שלי באמצעות הברית מילה. פגיעה בכבודי כאנוש וכבן ישראל, כן? כאיש שמאמין באמונה שלמה באלוהי אברהם, יצחק ויעקב.
I am angry about my own circumcision, but that was a long time ago in my mind. But when I think now, 33 years later, that it's still going on even though we've landed on the moon, and we have computers everywhere, and we've gone through such tremendous social upheavals, such tremendous reevaluation of society and our values, that this thing is still stuck in our practices. That makes me angrier.
Do you know what happened when I finally built up the courage to confront my Jewish father about carving his psychotic and demonstrably evil ideology into my body, raping me of one of the most fundamental acts of connection with another human being for life? Do you know what he said to me? My Jewish father looked me dead in the eye, dead in the face, straight in the eye, and what he said, I will never forget. And he said, "You're wrong." I'm wrong? I'm wrong? I may be many things, but I'm so far from fucking wrong! And I will tear our covenant to pieces to prove it! Do you feel my rage? Do you? Well, let me validate yours! Because it is fucking real, it is fucking justified, and you can draw a straight line back to the fucking rabbis to prove it. Well, now it is time for me to issue a commandment of my own. And that is this. We cannot and we will not tolerate Judaism in its current form. We are done tolerating cults that ritually mutilate their children's genitals.
Now, at this point, some of you may be saying, wait a minute. Aren't there limits to how much change we can accept as a culture and as a tradition? We're facing assimilation and declining affiliation rates. Aren't there more important issues for the Jewish community to address than circumcision? Besides, circumcision has always been seen as the primary emblem of Jewish identity. If such an essential commandment is now considered optional, what's left? The reality is that whether anyone likes it or not, circumcision is no longer a given in the Jewish community.
My husband and I are both Jewish, but like a growing number of Jewish families in the United States, Israel, and elsewhere, we decided not to circumcise.
We are both physicians, and based on our experiences witnessing circumcisions in the hospital and at Bris's, we never really had much of a conversation because it was totally clear to us that we would not be doing that to our sons.
I spared my son, and I am so glad that I was able to have that awareness to do that, and that he wasn't scarred in that way. Because the idea that just because something is young, that it doesn't feel, or that feeling is just going to heal, is naive, and it's counter to anything that we really know when we investigate with our intelligence, when we know what trauma does now.
Today, Jews all over the world that inform themselves about it increasingly do not have it done.
Parents here globally really are increasingly choosing to keep their boys intact, just as they do their girls. As a Jewish American, I'm particularly proud of the Brit Shalom movement, in which some Jewish parents even are choosing to forego a procedure for which there's an unimaginable amount of pressure within the community, and to welcome their children into the community with no act of violence.
Brit Shalom is a term that we use. It means a covenant of peace, and it's used instead of the Brit Milah, the covenant through circumcision.
Jews in Israel and all over the world, in ever-growing numbers, choose to leave their sons intact. Thanks to all the information that was revealed to me that day, my wife and I also decided to leave our son intact, so I called the Dr. Mohel and canceled the scheduled circumcision.
I come with my baby, my 1.5-year-old. He's growing up intact in Israel. There's a whole generation of intact babies, thousands of intact babies all across the nation.
As a Jewish man who has had this crime committed against him, I don't want to continue this to another generation.
I made a wrong choice, and I want him to be able to make better choices in his life than I did. Loving and protecting my child is the most important piece of my life. And I hope if I ever get grandchildren, which is something I may get in the future, if I get them, I will know better how to be better.
I was raised Jewish. A bris was just part of my upbringing, that was just expected. But when I was pregnant and I researched circumcision, I decided there's no way I was going to do that, and that there was no way I was going to do violence to my child. And so it was very hard for my family to accept at first. They thought he couldn't be Jewish then, and I told him that's not true. If he wanted to be Jewish, he could be Jewish. And there was, you know, he didn't need to be circumcised to be Jewish. Through the pregnancy, there was denial, there was arguments, but after he was born and they saw him, and I did everything I can to make his welcoming into the world completely nonviolent and completely gentle and welcoming, and then there was no way I was going to do violence to him after that. So they did accept it after he was born.
How old is your son now?
He's 27.
And have you talked with him about this issue?
Oh, he's very happy I did not do that to him. He's very, very happy.
I'm Jewish, and I'm uncut, and I think it's better that way.
I have five boys. 2 of them, the oldest, are circumcised, and 3 of them are intact. The big one is almost 21. He's going to the army. Now it's near Gaza. No problem at all. Kids can manage with their foreskin in Israel. It's no problem at all. It's only some myth that it's problem for them.
את מוכנה לעשות סקס עם גבר אם הוא לא נימול? כן? אם את מוכנה לעשות סקס עם מישהו שהוא לא נימול?
כן, אני תשובה חד משמעית, כן.
האם את מוכנה לעשות סקס עם מישהו שהוא לא נימול? כן. את מוכנה לעשות סקס עם מישהו שהוא לא נימול?
I'm a Jewish woman with an intact son who's in his 20s. It was a very difficult decision at the time, but I was teaching parents to massage their babies, and when I learned about that, I couldn't allow that for my son. When I started my advocacy, it seemed that Jews, because they've been doing this for thousands of years, that it's harder. They don't often want to engage in this conversation.
For many years, when Jewish friends and acquaintances from my synagogue would find out that I'd penned articles questioning Jewish circumcision, or more recently when they'd learned that I'm the author of The Measure of His Grief, the first novel ever written about circumcision, they'd quickly understand that I'm not neutral on this issue, that I think the Jewish people should stop circumcising. Here's what would sometimes happen. Oh, pause. But circumcision is so much healthier. It's the sign of the covenant, too. Plus, it's more hygienic, it prevents disease. Don't you know that AIDS rates in Africa have gone down dramatically because of it? Oh, but the procedure is so much worse when the person is an adult. Much less traumatic to get it done in infancy, much more humane. Nothing like what's done to women in Africa. Now that's barbaric. I'd smile and stay calm and explain that there's absolutely no reason for radical surgery on healthy tissue except as a last resort. Or I'd state the erogenous nature of foreskin tissue in the most matter-of-fact tone conceivable. Sadly, none of it would ever seem to change anyone's mind.
The notion that Judaism is a religion and a culture that cannot change, that doesn't correspond to what we as anthropologists know about cultures. Cultures change. They change constantly in response to individual decision-making, to individual will. If we look at any culture anywhere, we see that although basic patterns may remain, all sorts of individual parts of the cultures change.
Well, there's plenty of practicing Jews who don't circumcise. They haven't circumcised their son. They gave that up. In one way of looking at it, you're saying you're giving it up like you're giving up keeping kosher. That's kind of on its way out. There's lots of practicing Jews who don't keep kosher. There's services and so forth, getting whittled down to just high holidays. But people still consider themselves practicing Jews. But in America, they're hanging on to circumcision. That's an important part of Judaism. Now, scripturally, it is an important part of Judaism. But we're just going to have to get beyond it. Those texts written 5,000 years ago were written at a time when children and wives were chattel. They belonged to the father and husband, and you could abuse them and in many cases kill them with impunity. And that is just not the case anymore. So we can't do that anymore, and Judaism is just going to have to get over it.
Ultimately, Judaism will also do away with circumcision, just as they've done away with slavery and stoning adulterous women to death and many of the other practices that were considered pro forma in the biblical era, but now we know are wrong.
Learning about the harm of circumcision can motivate adults to protect children from this harm. In my preliminary interviews with rabbis, they agreed that the welfare of the child is the primary consideration. This suggests that raising awareness about the harm of circumcision could be persuasive to Jews.
If tomorrow, or if over the next 3 years, a large body of scientific evidence were to be established that circumcision was actually detrimental in a lot of ways to the male infant and to a man, would you sort of say, okay, that's it?
We would look at that very seriously. We would look at that very seriously. If a large body of information came about scientifically that said, you know what, we were wrong, let me tell you, when it comes to something that we find is detrimental, whether it was something that we shouldn't have done that we should, or something we should have done that we shouldn't, 100%. Because pikuach nefesh and saving lives and quality of lives is our number one concern. Parents have the obligation, not just the option, the obligation to protect their children.
My inquiry into Brit Milah has convinced me that every one of my concerns about the rite is rooted not just in my own personal worldview, but in Judaism itself. Let's go back to the concerns I mentioned, starting with pain. According to Jewish law, it is forbidden to cause tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, or pain of living things. Even the necessary causing of pain is considered cruel in Judaism. And Jewish law even prohibits the pairing up of a small and a large animal for plowing in case the asymmetry causes the littler one discomfort. Clearly, concern over the pain of others has strong Judaic roots. What about the concern that circumcision involves the surgical alteration of a perfectly natural, God-given part of the body? This concern, too, stems from Jewish thought. We Westerners generally find the bodily mutilation practiced in other cultures to be deeply distasteful. This distaste is based on the Hebrew Bible's denouncement of pagan practices such as tattooing and cutting the flesh. Then there's the risk of serious complications and even death from circumcision. No matter how small these risks are, they must be considered. Now, even this concern is an echo of Jewish law. Judaism regards life as infinitely sacred and gives it precedence over all else. Accordingly, Jewish law tells us that any medical procedure involving even the possibility of risk to life must be viewed as dangerous and is therefore strictly forbidden. Thus, the risk of circumcision is not just a medical concern, but a Jewish one. My concern that many see Brit Milah as a perfunctory act rather than a spiritual one is also a Jewish concern. This is a thorny point of Jewish law, but I will try to summarize the issues for you. Judaism stresses deeds more than faith. So, according to Jewish law, one should perform the commandments, of which circumcision is one, even if the act does not reflect one's spiritual beliefs. And yet, there is also a Jewish law requiring that we perform every commandment with our whole heart, with spiritual intent or kavanah. So, although Jewish law supports circumcision even when it is done without a broader commitment to Judaism or God, there is also Jewish reason to find it unsettling when this happens. I also mentioned my concern that circumcision requires parents to take advantage of their infant's helplessness. Even this concept, that we have a moral obligation to protect those who cannot protect themselves, is, you guessed it, a Jewish concept. Additionally, the idea of treating others as you yourself would like to be treated is a Jewish one. According to Jewish lore, the legendary Rabbi Hillel was once asked to summarize Judaism while standing on one leg. Hillel replied, "What is hateful to you, do not to your fellow creature."
This is my son, and this is a life that I cherish, and I'm not even going to cut him for God.
So what do you think God's response would have been to that?
I think that God would have said, "Good, you passed the test."
I agree with you.
My husband and I were both Jewish, and of course it means that our son will be Jewish too. It's not something you can take away from him. I don't think you can force a newborn to go through an irreversible, medical, unnecessary procedure. It's a religious commandment, and there are 612 others which we do not keep, so there's no reason for us to be cherry-picking this exact one. You can't force a medical procedure on a newborn and call it tradition.
Ich habe selber Kinder, 3 Kinder, 3 in Deutschland. Und ich habe sie natürlich nicht beschnitten, also es ist sogar nicht mal in Frage gekommen, also das war ganz klar. Und für mich dieses Engagement gegen die Zwangsbeschneidung ist ein Teil meiner Engagement für die Menschenrechte und für die Aufklärung.
לחילונים זה מיותר, כואב, הטלת מום, כל השיקולים, אין סיבה לעשות. בקיצור, בוא נעשה שורה תחתונה.
יש לך בנים?
בטח, יש לי בן 17 וגם בנות, ולא עשיתי לו ברית מילה. הילד יהודי, אמא שלו יהודייה, הילד יהודי, הלב שלנו יהודי, זאת אומרת, יהודי זה מי שמרגיש יהודי, לא מי שחתכו לו.
Today there are a lot of intact boys and men in Israel that they are without breath, and they are Jewish the same as everybody.
God Almighty, I mean, no, you are not Jewish because you have or don't have a foreskin. Remember, the circumcision does not in any way affect someone's Jewishness.
Really, religion is in our actions. It's in our ethics, in our responsibility, in our compassion. Removing genital tissue from my son doesn't make him a good human being.